Rolling intro.
So you think that you can tell us how to live our lives, never questioning the source from which your moral code derives. You think that suffering is part of some great plan that's been devised. I wonder what will it take for you to start opening your eyes? I wonder.
There I am. There's Jenna. Hey, everybody. Atheist Experience. We are live. Today is Sunday, March 29th, 2020. Just 2 days before the most important day in the world, which is my birthday.
Hey, happy birthday.
Thank you. And then it's April Fool's Day, which some people would call Atheist Day, but we kind of already did Atheist Day back March 23rd. And before we get started, a huge special thank you to Vern, Mark, and Jim, and Eric, and Greg, and Paul, and Johnny, and everybody else who's been working around the clock behind the scenes. There's the crew cam. You will see there in the crew cam that there is nobody there in front of all of the machines that are, in fact, running this show. And that's because Vern went through and helped set up VPN, virtual private networking, so that our call screeners can call screen from home. And Mark can run the Wirecast stuff from home. And Vern can run the audio stuff from home. And I can be at home. And Jenna can be at home. And you callers can be at home, because we're currently at least in Austin, the mayor has produced a stay-at-home order. And that is setting us up so that we're kind of, locked in, minorly quarantined, but we didn't want that to inhibit our ability to do a show, if at all possible. I can't begin to express, while I sat around and played Doom Eternal and watched Adventure Time instead of actually doing work. Other people did actual work and allowed the show to happen. And I'm going to say that in my wisdom, the best thing for me to do is to stay out of their way until somebody said they needed me. And the only thing I was needed for was to get a microphone to Jenna and a couple of cables. And yeah, we're here live. How are you?
I'm doing pretty great. I actually have found out that I really like being isolated. I don't know. I guess the social pressure. I don't know. I actually got lucky enough to be able to work from home too. So
that's good.
I never got to do that before.
Yeah, I know some people who are working from home. I know some of the people who are temporarily not being paid, essentially not really employed.
Mm-hmm.
There have been layoffs. Some people are going to be collecting unemployment. This is an incredibly complex and difficult situation. And there's a website that I like to go to called worldometers.info, and they have a coronavirus tracker up there. And like, as of the time of this recording, there are 718,656 cases, 33,891 deaths, 150,918 recovered, but there's still 500,000 active cases, with 5% serious or critical. And of the cases that are closed, 18% of them have resulted in death. And so as we get more and more information, it's difficult for people to understand and process. What's the death rate? Is it 1%? Is it 3%? Is it 4.7%, which is what it currently is if you just did the raw number? All we can do is come up with the best estimates that we can with the information we have. We don't get to say, oh, there's probably a whole bunch of people out there who aren't diagnosed, because that could make the numbers better or worse or the same. And I think there were a lot of mistakes made in handling this, but the information that I want to pass on is that there's no sense in panicking, but there is a sense in being attentive and responsible. And if you're in a position where you're working in essential services, by all means, continue to do that and follow CDC protocols. Wash your hands. Don't touch your face with dirty hands. Practice social distancing, or as some of us are doing, social isolation. Like I can see Jenna on my screen. We're no longer in the same room to do this. But we wanted to make sure that we got a show, and we do have a show, and we have callers and a way of taking callers. And that's the next thing I want to talk about. The number that you would normally call in on for the Atheist Experience is not going to work today. Instead, you can look at the lower third of the screen, 512-991-9242. That is the phone number to call today and for the duration, we think, of our quarantine or remote shows. If the number changes, obviously it'll be updated on the lower third. And right now, that means we don't have a toll-free option. And I know that during Talk Heathen, there was someone who called in from their phone from Okinawa, Japan, and sat there for ages. So I just want to make sure that we're letting people know, if you're calling long distance, we will do what we can to get you on earlier so that you don't have calls. And we're paying per minute for all these calls as well. But if this is cost prohibitive, by all means, just email tv@atheist-community.org. That email goes to myself, all of the hosts and co-hosts of the various shows. And is going to probably be answered by Justin because Justin is.
You're actually pretty good at responding too.
I do some of them as I have time, but I have this thing where it's not always in my best interest to be the one who jumps on and responds right away.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if I'm just going to write something that's benefiting one person, unless it's something I'm going to make a video about or talk about on Atheist Experience or something like that, I try to make sure other people get a chance to chime in as well.
That's interesting because I actually try, unless it's directed at me, I try not to answer it just because I feel like I have so much more to learn, and I don't want to send out an email to somebody that has some kind of incorrect information on it. I'm just terrified of giving someone the wrong stuff. So that's why I don't really respond that much to those yet, unless somebody specifically addresses me.
Yeah, and that's
will get there.
A concern. Bad information is going to happen anywhere and everywhere. I'm going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. People on other shows are going to make mistakes. The real issue is how we deal with that. And if somebody's willing to point out, oh, hey, you guys said this and it was wrong. Okay, cool. If you made the case, then we ought to correct it. It doesn't mean we're going to start every show with here's a list of all the things we got wrong. But it does mean that we can avoid making those mistakes in the future. And if there was something that was, an egregious error that needed to be corrected, we can deal with that. But what we're asking for from callers today is to understand that we're not using our regular system. And so there will be a slight delay. There's a delay between me and Jenna. There's a delay between Jenna and me. There's a delay between each of us independently and the callers. And so just exercise a little bit more patience. I will make try to make judicious use of the mute button. Because one of the things about this call system is that it doesn't handle full duplex very well. Full duplex is like if you're on your phone and you can both talk at each other at the same time. Instead, it will sometimes ramp up one audio so that you can't interrupt or break in. And that's why we'll use mute. But
all right.
You ready to get to it?
Let's go. This is going to be fun.
Let's see. And keeping with that trend, we have Dave in Vienna, Austria. You're on with Jenna and Matt. How are you?
Hey, hello. I'm doing well. I can't believe you took my call first. It's awesome.
I think you called from the farthest distance away, so I was more worried about your long distance bill than anybody else's.
Well, Skype is a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So what do you got for us? I
wrote it down so I don't make a big jumbled mess of it. So I'm just going to read it quickly. Well, not too quickly, I hope. Basically, my question is, what can atheists like me do, or what are atheist groups like the ACA already doing in response to the real harm being caused by belief in God and prayer right now? And I'm specifically talking about large prayer gatherings in this time of the coronavirus. And I could give like 5 examples just from a New York Times article a couple of days ago. And I'm just wondering, do we call local or regional or state officials or senators? Do you call the news? Can some organizations take some sort of legal action against the churches and pastors endangering the public? Or at least call for the pastors to be arrested for engineering a massive public health hazard? And I know we can't gather in protest because that's irresponsible and irrational.
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's a real issue. And I think all of your suggestions are viable, apart from whether or not we can. I can't file charges against a church. Instead, I could attempt to sue them for various things. But the best thing to do is to call the local authorities if you know of a gathering that violates whatever the protocols are in that area, because not every area has the same protocols in place. Austin is now with a stay-at-home order until April 13th, but that's not true everywhere. And if somebody's having gatherings that exceeds either the local or national restrictions there, then the best thing to do is to notify the authorities. And perhaps I'm fully supportive of the notion of contacting the news media to say, hey, why are we sitting here at home? Why are, these other organizations, being essentially quarantined, but these prayer warriors can go out? And it's not just like, here's a church. There are Shane Isgreg, who is the new co-host on Atheist Experience. I saw him linked to somebody that's doing the faith healing stuff, and they're actively encouraging people to go ahead and meet and seek healing because God will protect them.
Tony
These
Bell,
things need to be reported.
he says they're blessing handkerchiefs, and that a healing virtue will go on them. And you got a Reverend Spell in Louisiana who's going against the governor's orders, gathering 1,000 congregants.
Yeah,
I mean, they're doing it, already defying local law. And even if they're not, aren't they violating just general public health rules?
Go ahead, Jen.
What's a health risk, whether there's a rule or not?
I would say that this kind of thing, this kind of I guess spreading of viruses and just ignoring, ordinances and all kinds of things like that have happened ever since humans have existed. And I think that if you look at, I guess over history, I don't know. I think we're getting a better handle on things when you don't have certain governmental changes. I don't know. I think we're working on it. I think that ACA is we're trying to promote working remotely and staying home. But I don't know. I think that there's nothing we can do about things like that except learn from it and talk about it, which is exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, make people aware of it. We're doing what we can by example, but if I knew that there was a church in Austin that was meeting, and I don't know of any, the mayor's order about the stay-at-home order specifically prohibited those gatherings as well, listed them as non-essential. And the one thing is to challenge this on is, if God is everywhere, and prayer works just as well when you're at home as it does when you're at church, why can't all these people stay at home and pray? Why can't they create a telephone circle and pray? It seems to me...
Actually, in some religions, there are theological reasons. I mean, like last month, almost 1,000 Orthodox Jews gathered at the Western Wall specifically to pray for God to give relief on the coronavirus. But this is actually consistent with Jewish theology, in which you're supposed to pray as a community, and it's believed to have more power.
And also it gets worse for Jews, because if it's the Sabbath, then they can't use the telephone without one of those auto dialer workarounds, for some Jews anyway. The thing is, if they're, I think that the gatherings are there as a sort of screw you to everybody else, in the sense of, look how protected we are from God. By God, we are going to get together to pray, and our church is going to be safe. And it's an opportunity to show that our church is the one true church, that we are truly biblical. And, and the thing is, I think it's going to backfire, like it did in New York with that Jewish temple in New York that ended up with that whole area quarantined because one person showed up there. And there's they can't prove the thing they want to prove, and it can backfire too, because then you can just say, we had everybody in our church gathering and praying, and God protected us, but he only protected those of us who are really sincere. We can't help it if some random insincere believer with coronavirus stumbled in off the street and started infecting people. And so it's just,
they're not only making them
the order. Yeah, it's just not to obey the order.
They're not only endangering themselves, which would be bad enough by itself, but they're endangering everyone in their community. If you don't mind, I actually have a slightly philosophical question. If I could, it's connected very much to this. I mentioned this to a relief friend of mine, and he said something like, "You can believe in prayer without being stupid." And it brought on a very big conversation about where I was referring to, if I understood you correctly in the past, this idea that belief is not something we choose. We don't choose to believe or disbelieve something.
Right.
That kind of grows on us or whatever. So it seems to me that if you really believe that your prayer or your gathering and praying is going to make the man in the sky, make the bad juju go away, it's moral and logical. It's not rational because it's based on an irrational belief, but it's logical of following the irrational belief to do it.
No, I was raised that there's God's law and then there's the political law. And God's law is to follow the government law. But at the end of the day, if it comes down to choosing between one or the other and you're conflicted, then you have to go with God's law. And so that was what I was taught growing up. And so I'm just wondering, well, what is everybody else being taught? Who's teaching these people? Because that's just what I was told was just the right thing to do,
Sure. Thanks so much for taking my call. Like I mentioned, I live in Vienna, Austria, but my family's in the States, so I've got no grounding to take any action against any church anywhere. But if you do, or anyone else listening is in a town where their church is putting the rest of the town or the community in danger with this gathering, please take some action. I don't know what action would be. That's why I'm calling you guys.
I think contacting the relevant authorities and potentially the news media is one thing. If you're going to have a talk with the people, yes, you could view it as moral and internally consistent with their reasoning if they are sincere believers that they must gather together to, entreat God to act upon their behalf. If they're Bible believers, you can also go to a couple of different passages in the Bible, like Romans 13, where it says to obey those who rule over you. There are no authorities apart from what God has appointed, and your leaders have been chosen by God, which is also convenient when they try to claim that, a particular leader is the Antichrist, because even if it were the Antichrist, it's still a leader that's appointed by God, according to the Bible.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be atheist groups that would take action. I would wish to hear more from like the American Medical Association, some medical organizations to say, hey, this isn't a matter of faith. This is a matter of public safety, and you're putting us all in danger.
Yeah, it's another thing is that that people are selective about who they hear it from. Like, for example, I was having a conversation with somebody that I disagree with on a lot of things, and I asked them. They were telling me something about this bill that was trying to be passed, trying to give everybody money for the coronavirus, and I was told that that Nancy Pelosi ruined it, and I was like, well, let's talk about what actually happened. Like the facts of it. And this person didn't know the facts. And when I asked this person, I said, well, if I had told you, okay, well, the president had done this and that's bad, would you just accept that? Or would you want to know more information to make a judgment for yourself? And this person said, oh, well, coming from you, I know that you so ... This person was assuming, oh, well, because it's coming from you, that means that you're biased against this person. So that means that I can't trust anything that you say. And that's just how they live their life.
That is literally argumentum ad hominem to say that, because I don't trust you, I can't trust anything you say, which is one of those things that kind of seems reasonable to people. If I find somebody to be untrustworthy, the temptation is to not believe anything they say. But somebody who I don't trust and who I know to be a liar could still say, you know what, the sky is blue. And I would have to say, you're correct.
Right.
It appears blue. And then we can have a separate discussion. But thanks for the call, Dave. I'm going to let you go now. We're trying to get on to some other callers. Appreciate it.
Dave.
And I'd like to not only see medical organizations, but also the churches who are obeying the orders, call out those that aren't. How weak is your God that their God is evidently stronger, that they can be at home and doing this without endangering people? Maybe, I remember something my dad told me ages ago, which when I had made a comment about, if prayer can heal things, why do people go to doctors? And his answer was, well, God gave us brains and gave us doctors, and he expects us to use our brains. So it's kind of like the Lord helps those who help themselves kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the truth is that's not really a response, because if God can do anything and prayer can do anything, as it's repeatedly stated, then we wouldn't need doctors.
Well, it said he can, but he won't because he wants to give you free will. So
Yeah. He won't do it because he wants doctors to keep getting money.
yeah.
We've got Anthony in Florida on the line now with Jenna and Matt. You talked about the influence of religion over people. Why do I think that the influence is so strong if there is no God? Is that kind of the summation of your question, Anthony?
Yes, that's the question. Is it okay if I give you some background on myself?
Sure.
So first of all, I grew up Pentecostal. You're well reversed. I think you said you were Baptist. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of the doctrine.
Yeah.
Basically, physical manifestation of things. People shout, scream, dance, this and that. Yeah. Now, whether if you walk into a Pentecostal church and you see this, whether you believe it to be real or not, that's still a bunch of people being influenced by something.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is, like, humans have moved past believing in a lot of bullshit that we used to believe in. Why won't the concept of a God, why won't that go away? And why do humans continue to believe in this?
Well, it will go away, and it is going away to some extent. The world is becoming increasingly secular, and church attendance and belief in specific gods is at least on the decline. But when you ask a question like, religion clearly has influence over people, I agree. And then you say, why do I think that influence is so strong if there is no God? First of all, it's not my position necessarily that there is no God. But even if we were to assume there's no God, that doesn't change the influence that religion has, because religion is a package of ideas. Irrespective of whether there's a God or anything supernatural behind them, it's a package of ideas. And that's why there are so many different religions that point to so many different gods. You know, the Hindu versions of God versus Islamic versions of God versus Jewish and Christian, and et cetera. You go through all these. All of these can influence people. And it's because we as human beings are, there are things we don't know, and religions claim to know those things, or at least offer us access to someone who probably would know those things. We have fears about the unknown, and religions primarily exist to get rid of those fears, although religions create new fears that they also solve. All of this is appealing because it is ideas. We are walking brains that test the universe that we're in. And as long as someone is making claims that feel right or feel comforting, that we cannot demonstrate are actually false, that's going to be appealing. It's always going to be more appealing for you to think that you know what happens after you die than to sit around and agonize over not knowing what happens after you die. It is a comforting lie, or if it is in fact true, and I don't know which of the various afterlife models are true, all of those are potentially comforting in getting rid of this fear. The key, and what has been working, is to teach skepticism and critical thinking to get people more comfortable with saying, I don't know, so that maybe they can realize, hey, I'm not the only one who doesn't know. I have no idea why there's something instead of nothing, or if that question even makes sense. I have no idea if there's an afterlife. I don't have any good reason to think there is one, and I have really good reasons to think there's not an afterlife. But for somebody to pretend they have the answer to that is kind of disingenuous, but it is definitely appealing.
I know that I personally believed that I had that answer, that I thought that I knew for a fact that there is heaven, there was purgatory, there are angels and all that stuff. And that was because I grew up in a culture that everybody was kind of on the same page. So it was just how I grew up. Everybody that I had encountered and had a conversation with up until I was, 16 or 17, believed that there was a God, or at least when I brought it up or it came up, they didn't give me any kind of any kind of sign that they don't believe. Maybe because they didn't want to be rude or something like that. But I had never been exposed to any other idea. I had just thought, well, this is what everybody believes. That's got to be what's true. So I can say that's why I believed, and that's why I didn't promote skepticism in my life. It was a comfort to me. It was all that I knew. But if I had been taught different ways, like skepticism, if I had been taught psychological ways of how to take care of my body and take care of my mental health, rather than retreat to a bedroom and go onto my knees and just close my hands and hope that that'll just magically make everything work. I have better solutions. I just didn't think that would be possible.
I see. Okay, well, I understand your perspective. You mentioned that secularism is on the rise, or on the rise. Is that really the case, though? Because in my everyday life, I still see people going to church. I still see people talking about church. With this whole coronavirus thing, I've seen people post comments on social media about, various things about whatever they believe. It doesn't really seem to be on the decline to me, like people claim.
Well, one of the things is that you're using a sample set, which we are all likely to use, which is, well, I see people doing this and I see this. Instead of using my personal experience, I tend to go to the data and the polls. And so for example, there's an article tied to a Gallup poll from April of 2019, so just 1 year ago, that shows that half of Americans are church members, down from 70% in 1999. So we went from 70% of the population in 1999 as the member of some church to 50% of Americans are part of some church in 20 years. And you look at church attendance and church numbers and polls asking people, do they believe in a God? How important is a God belief to them? All of those things are on the decline in all of the, reliable, responsible studies. And I have friends who are pastors who are talking about how church tends to decline. Now, part of this has changed because mega churches got more popular for a while and people wanted to go to the church where everybody was. So some of the smaller churches shut down, but that shouldn't change the total number of people who are active, who are members and who will participate in churches. And from like around 1998, 73% of people had a religious preference. And 18 years later, it was down to 64% had a religious preference. So there were, nearly 10% of the population stopped having a religious preference in the span of a decade.
Right. So
Sounds good to me.
Data.
Yeah, it's, and this isn't me, but I mean, by all means, go just Google church attendance and you'll find the same stats that I'm referencing. And Pew Forum has studies up about attendance at church services and how it's dropping, how often people go to church, how important it is, and they break it down by denominations and other things. So the fact that you might see, like, if I were to try to do statistics kind of the same way that you did, then my evidence would be that nobody goes to church anymore because the people I hang out with don't go to church anymore unless they're like going to take notes.
And I was deconverted, so I'm Exhibit A. Oh, you were deconverted. Probably half of the people that go to the ACA were deconverted.
Yep, Dan and everybody else. Is that kind of cleared up a little bit? I mean, it's pretty easy, Anthony, just, Google and then also research so that you're not getting statistics from one source, that you maybe check a couple of reliable sources. Because if it's like ChristianPropagandaMagazine.com says church attendance is on the rise, but Gallup polls and Pew studies and independent organizations that don't have any kind of bias are reporting something different, maybe we should stick with the less biased sources. And also, if you go to Atheism Rocks, theismsucks.com and you find I wouldn't use those statistics.
Well, okay, so what can you give me information on where I can find, I'm sure you studied this, the core of my argument, the reason why I called, and that's psychological effect. That I'm not even saying religion, just the concept, because I know there's different gods, I know there's different belief systems. I'm talking about the concept of a God existing. What can I find information on that explains this? Because this is one thing I never hear atheists talk about. Whether you believe it to be true or not, it's influential. People convert, people change their lives for the better. A lot of good comes out of religion, a lot of good comes out of people supposedly giving their life to Christ or whatever.
Yeah.
So why does this have so much more influence than Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or aliens, Bigfoot, any of that. Why?
Oh, because people have been killed for years over being forced to believe this stuff.
So it's about what is contained in the ideas. So the Easter Bunny doesn't tell you anything about how you should live your life. So that's not going to have as much impact on people as something that's telling people how to live their life. And you'll find millions of people who go to secular self-help seminars because they've found the one guru who's telling them, you need to empower you and do. People find different ideas like that empowering. And when you are floundering around through life and don't necessarily know what you should do, there are people who will benefit from someone saying, here's what you should do. I would argue that's the reason that Jordan Peterson is popular, because he's giving people easy, simple things that they can do that ostensibly should improve their life, even if he's wrong. But we see this whether or not there's even any sort of God or religion attached to it. Packaged sets of beliefs and gregarious, charismatic speakers who can inspire people. This is the way human beings have always been inspired. None of it points to any evidence for a God. And the clear way to do that is to say Christianity's had a massive influence. If that is an argument that therefore the God of Christianity is real and true, then how do we deal with the massive influence of Islam or Hinduism, which are pointing to either a different version of a similar God or completely different gods? Those things have impacted people's lives too. And so if we find that the one thing that all of these have in common is that they put themselves in a position of authority and have a collection of statements that are designed to influence the mind of people, then that's where we should put the credit for the influence, not on a proposed God outside of it.
Well, in addition to that, when I think about, the town of thousands of people, well, the neighboring town of thousands of people that I grew up in going to church to, most of these people did not logic themselves into this. They didn't have this class, or they didn't get together and try to figure out which one was right. And what happened was they were born into a family that raised them to believe in, Lutheranism or Catholicism or whatever. And they just believe it because dad said so and mom said so and grandpa said so. And I personally don't think that most people choose this stuff. I think most people are brought up believing it because their parents were, and their parents were, and their parents were.
But the thing is, I'm sorry, Jen, I wouldn't say most people. Like, I'll give you an example. Back when I was younger, there was this guy that I used to hang out with. And me and him grew up together. We went to high school and all that. And we used to do all the typical teenager stuff. Drugs, chasing women, drinking underage, all this stuff. This guy used to do a lot of dirt with me. And we so happened to both have parents that went to the church, went to Pentecostal church. So, of course, we would have to go. We didn't want to go. We had to go.
Right.
One day, this guy comes in. He's like a minister from some other church, like a missionary from somewhere. And this guy comes in, and he was walking around the congregation, praying for people. As the Pentecostals call it, the spirit was moving. It was pretty intense, even though I wasn't personally into it myself. I was observing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was standing next to my friend. And keep in mind, this guy had never talked about God, never talked about wanting to get saved, anything like that. He was just like me, a bad kid. The minister walks up to my friend, touches him. All he does is touch him on the head, and my friend just goes crazy. Well, as you would, what the Pentecostals do, going crazy with the shouting and all that stuff. And this came completely out of nowhere, and I was just looking like, wow. And it's things like that where I'm like, maybe there is a God. You know what I mean? Like,
the thing is, Anthony, it didn't.
This is what I mean by influence.
The thing is, well, there's a couple of issues to address here. First of all, it didn't come from out of nowhere. Okay, we are all creatures of habit and observation, and so when people are slain in the spirit, whether it's Benny Hinn or whatever else, we've studied this. There's a book from the 19th century called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowd. It's crowds. It's not isolated to Christianity. We see the same sort of responses within voodoo religions and shamanistic religions and things like that. People are trained, whether they know it or not, whether they wanted to be or not, to react and respond in a certain way. Magicians and con artists exploit these things in people. Magicians do it for entertainment, and con artists do it for financial or power advantages. So your friend clearly had some idea of what was supposed to happen in that scenario. But once again, if we look at a scenario where that happens and other scenarios where it happened, the one common thread isn't, hey, there's this God or this particular God. It doesn't matter what you point to. Maybe it's like Dumbo's magic feather, that when you hold up Dumbo's magic feather and say, this is God, God can do anything. Once people start believing that, then they fall into certain patterns of habits that are consistent with that church, which is why a Pentecostal church, despite worshiping the same God that I did as a Southern Baptist, has a completely different feel and experience than the Baptist church did. And so when you have human minds that are susceptible to influence, the religions that we have now are the ones that were demonstrably best at influencing people. The religions that didn't have that effect on people are the ones that have died out. They no longer have great audiences and everything else. So it is the how impactful the ideas are and the rituals and the traditions and making yourself subject to an authority. This is essentially in the same category as how I'm on dangerous footing actually saying this. My view of hypnosis is that there's no demonstrable hypnotic state, and that basically what we see with hypnosis, whether it's stage hypnotism, etc., are two people agreeing to play act. And that doesn't mean that somebody's lying. It means you are giving someone else permission to tell you what to do, and you will go along with it. You've been given some excuse to not feel as responsible for your actions. And religions often do the same thing, not in the sense of being hypnotized, but in the sense of controlling those portions of the brain and accessing them so that people are more susceptible to that. I'd recommend you could go to skepticsannotatedDictionary.com. You could do research from a number of different skeptics organizations, but that book that I mentioned, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, there have been a number of psychological experiments where the more someone speaks as if they are an authority, the more likely a certain portion of the population is to just go along with it, which is how you get otherwise good people working with the Nazis or shocking people in the Milgram experiments, even though they wouldn't have done this on their own. We are born to trust authorities, like our parents, because that's a good thing. And then other people take advantage of that. Religions take advantage of it. Con artists take advantage of it. Magicians take advantage of it. It's about who we are as people. And there's a ton of stuff to research, but it's way more than we're going to be able to get into here. But hopefully we've given you like a start at some places to look.
Yes, I definitely understand your perspective. I'll check out your recommendation.
One question to ask yourself, Anthony, is so you have a friend, and I know you didn't finish the story, but I'm assuming that your friend who used to run around and do bad stuff with you had a life-changing positive experience from this time in church. Is that correct?
No, actually, to be honest, after I witnessed that, he went right back to doing what he was doing.
Oh,
That's the point I'm trying to make is like, people might say, oh, he was making it, or he was just doing what everyone else was doing. It was just that one time. He had no reason to do that. He had no one to show off for. If anything, he was probably embarrassed by it.
It might be,
And
but
he went right
what you'll
back to
find,
great.
I'm still going to make the same point, even though your story actually makes my point better. And that is, if you find people who've been changed for the better by religion, which is something you referenced earlier, I need to ask yourself, are there people who have been changed for the better through means other than religion? Like, are Jenna and I generally better people now as atheists, adhering to principles of secular humanism and rational skepticism and critical thinking? Are we fundamentally better people than we were then?
Absolutely. It's possible for someone to be a better person without believing in a God. I don't tie my morality to believing in a God. What I'm saying is that the influence is still there. A lot of people change for the better because of religion, but I'm not saying that.
But also some people change for the worse because of religion. Because if your religion, for example, makes you a bigot, either with regard to race or gender or sexual issues and things like that, that's making you a worse person with regard to interacting with other people. And so if religion can make you better or worse, and a lack of religion can make you better or worse, then clearly we're not necessarily pointing to anything true or better. When we point to religion, we're just pointing to the one that is more popular because it's been in a privileged position in society where religion has had massive tax-free privilege, de facto, here's what we need. And because it's held by the overwhelming majority of people still, it has that status.
Well, wouldn't you say there's good and bad in everything? I mean, there's some people that become police and become assets to their community. Some people become police and become asshole cops.
Wait, so are you saying that because some people can become religious and become better people, that means that religion is good?
I mean, that's what I mean. In general, religion has a lot of good to it. Of course, there's people that abuse it. People abuse everything: politics, positions of power. People abuse a lot of things. Religion is no different. I think that for the most part, a lot comes good out of the concept of a divine being.
So why do we need it?
That's the question. Why?
I think for me,
why is it a thing?
I think for me, it is because thinking and understanding and being comfortable with a lack of knowledge is terrifying for the overwhelming majority of people. The fear of death, the fear of loneliness, the fear of there not being justice. And so religions come in and say, I've got you covered after death. I've got you covered right now. And there will be a sense of justice. You don't have to worry about it. And that lets people not worry about it. The problem is, and the only thing I care about is it true? Because I have no evidence that any religious claim tied to gods or the supernatural or anything else is true. And the same is the case for a sense of justice. And that puts me in a position where I have to recognize that all the available evidence points to, if we want justice, we have to be the ones seeking and enacting the justice. Right. We have to be the dispensers of justice, and we have to do better at it because religion isn't doing shit.
So do you, Mike and Jenna, sorry, Matt and Jenna, do you think the world will be better off without religion?
I don't know.
Who's to say it wouldn't become worse? Maybe if it was somehow discovered that there's absolutely no God, more people will become nihilistic. Maybe
I personally,
because more people.
Sorry, I think that it would depend on how and why it became not religious. Like if it was because people educated themselves about how to determine whether or not something was true and that's why it disappeared, then yes, I think that it would be a better place, because I think that most of the world's problems are the basis of most of the world problems. It comes from human ignorance, when it comes to racism and prejudice and global warming and all of that. So I think that would make it better. But if it was some kind of like magical, okay, nobody's allowed to practice religion anymore, it's banned, then I think that would create a lot of problems, because it does create a comfort for a lot of people.
Yeah. So, Jenna and I are in agreement here. This is something I talked about before. I can't say, hey, if religion goes away, waving a magic wand, that would be a good thing.
Right.
What I can say is that given the available evidence we have, yes, there are people who, after they give up religion, are going to become more nihilistic, but that's also something you can deal with education and teaching like that. What I would say is there are good principles within some religions, which you can keep because they are good principles while doing away with the bad stuff. So keep the good stuff wherever you find it, whether it originated in some religious text or some small conclave of people. Keep the good stuff, but get rid of the stuff that isn't demonstrably true and isn't good. And then you will almost certainly have a better world. I can't show that we're not going to, run into extinction because of bad ideas. But if the goal, which is the goal of skepticism, is to eliminate bad ideas, then the only thing left is good ideas, right?
Right.
If we end up with a worse world by eliminating bad ideas, that would be very, very surprising to me, but I'm still going to favor the truth over a comforting lie.
I understand. Well, that's one thing I respect about you, Matt, is that even if I disagree, you have an interesting perspective. So I respect you for that. I watched the show. I'm a fan. I don't want to take up too much time. I'll let you
Thanks,
move on to
Anthony.
the next caller, but thanks.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I appreciate
Thank you. It was nice talking to you, Anthony.
it. Jenna, you can see the calls. Do you have someone in particular that you might want to go to next?
How about Alex from Saskatchewan?
Alex from Saskatchewan wants an honest discussion. What is science, and can we put it to the test regarding evolution? For some reason, the talk button didn't work just then. Now you should be on, Alex. How are you?
Yeah, I'm here. Good. Well, good to be talking to you. Yeah.
Hi.
What I wanted to do is, hi, Jenna. Sorry about that. We hear discussions about science, whatever the case, and the question is, well, let's put science to the test. So, like, I thought to myself, well, before we can go any farther, can we come up with a common definition of what science is, just quickly? Do you want to give me a definition of science, Jenna or Matt, and then we can go from there?
Science is originally from the Latin for knowledge, and so it is methodologies that lead us reliably to knowledge or the most accurate understanding of the world. I don't know what you mean by putting science to the test, because science isn't a thing. It is rooted in a notion of a desire to best understand the world. Science doesn't make proclamations of truth. It creates models that are the best current explanation we have given the available evidence. And all of the findings of science are constantly being tested and independently verified. That's where the process of falsifiability works in, and peer review. So I don't know what you mean by putting science to the test, when that's all that science is constantly putting data to the test.
Maybe can we put the
Okay.
scientific method to the test? Is that what you mean?
Oh, well, basically what I was asking is, if we could come up with a common definition of science, and you've answered it well. I mean, in other words, I think we could say that it's, experimental, it's demonstrable, it's reliable, it's repeatable. In other words, we can show with science something to be true because we can do it over and over and over again, wouldn't you?
Not necessarily. So while repeating results is a thing, that doesn't mean that you can't do scientific investigations where you can't, like, for example, consider, first of all, science is all about inference. It's not deductive. It's not lock solid. It is, what are the best inferences we can make from available evidence? And so when you look at something like the theory of evolution by means of natural selection, now evolution is just a fact. It's an observed fact that there is a variety of living things and that allele frequency within genes changes over time. And so the model, the theory of evolution by means of natural selection, is just an attempt to explain as best we can what the driving factors are for evolution. And it didn't have to be that natural selection won out. It could have been that artificial selection had the most evidence for it. But as we begin to explore this, we realize, hey, we have no way to demonstrate that there's an artificial selector in here, and we can watch things. We as humans can be artificial selectors, like we breed certain dogs together and change them, or dogs being related to wolves. But evolution, we don't have a time machine. So the way we can make testable predictions within evolution is to say, okay, all of this is based on a bunch of different disciplines, not only biology, but geology, et cetera. And so if our understanding and our model is as accurate as we think it is, then we should be able to go to this region of Earth and dig down to rock of this age and find a transitional species of this type in that rock. And that's exactly what we did when we discovered Tiktaalik. And it doesn't matter if we don't find more examples of Tiktaalik. That shows as evidence that at least our understanding is reasonably good. We knew enough about the way the Earth was in this area at this time and what biological life forms were there from other fossil data, et cetera. And we said, we should be able to find something like this in this particular rock. And we should also, by the way, not find the classic example of fossil rabbits in the Precambrian, because we know when modern rabbits, it's not like you're going to find that. And so we go out and we made a testable prediction and we found Tiktaalik. Now, that just ties in with countless other disciplines within evolution where we start talking about shared common ancestry. And you can look at things like chromosome 2, the fusing of chromosome 2. Can we prove that that is a fused chromosome? No, but it has all the, you can't prove anything in that sense. But to the extent that we can demonstrate that the human chromosome 2 is fused, all the marks are there. The telomeres, the overlapping, the slight difference that we would expect to see is all there. And it's the model that makes the most sense of, we have common ancestors that are also apes, and at some point, these two chromosomes fuse, and that is what makes humans different. That's what science does. It doesn't say, "Ooh, this is absolutely true." If someone had a model that countered evolution, that said, "Hey, all of what science knows about evolution by natural selection is wrong, and there's actually a different answer," then they would be able to present evidence for it, have it scientifically evaluated, and it would become the new prevailing theory. That's the way science works. That's why I was confused, because science is constantly tested. This COVID-19 is a demonstration of evolution in action.
Okay, now let me just ask you this. So let's say since the formation of the world, or the beginning of the universe, which was I think about 13.77 billion years ago, whatever the case there, obviously were forces and processes in action, right, from that particular time. So my second question to you would be, is this: do you believe that the processes and the forces that were in action at the formation of the world are still the processes and actions, or processes and forces that are basically at work in the world today?
So so let me, sorry, I had to cough. So when you say the beginning of the world and you say 13.77 billion years ago, that's well,
we could go too with, let's say, the average age of the Earth. Let's say it's around 4.8 billion years. But the point there is, obviously, there was a start. It's produced. So those forces, if you take a look and, as people give you the model or whatever the case, the forces that were there continued until around 4.8 billion years ago. And then what happens is then you have the formation of the world. So the question is, are the forces that were there and present the same forces that are there, here, and present, and driving that process forward?
So this is essentially a question of, can we demonstrate the uniformity of the physical rules? And while we're still working out, hang on, while we're still working out quantum mechanics and how that fits in there, generally speaking, the prevailing view of science is that gravity is what it is and works how it works, and has since the formation of the universe. And once you have that as a functional part of a model, in order to show that it was different, you would need to provide evidence that it was different, or that it changed. And whether or not there's local changes, like at different points in the universe, where these foundational principles, the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, those sorts of things, if they're in fact different, you would need to show evidence for it, because of the null hypothesis, which is that something isn't true until it's demonstrated, or that this is the way things are and have been until we have reason to think they have been some other way.
Right. My point here is, I believe that the forces that were present at the beginning of the world, or whatever the case is, the claim is, are still present and active today. Because if there is this steady progression, or the evolution of things over a period of time, there's got to be some constant. So that constant would be the forces, And so when I take a look at the world today, I think, well, what are some of the natural forces in the world? And I think to myself, well, there's atmospheric, there's solar, lunar, chemical, with the Earth movement to whatever case, you have that. You have hydraulic forces of water. All of these forces are the forces that are basically operating in the world today. And if the model is that things continually, evolve or whatever the case, I would think that those forces would have to be present today to push this forward. Because
no. So the fact that gravity, like, let's just agree, you and I, gravity, the acceleration due to gravity has been the same. Okay.
Yes.
Does that mean that things are like if I let go of this container, it will fall? But if it's sitting there, gravity's still acting on it, even though it's not falling. The physical forces that we're talking about when we talk about uniformitarianism or the notion that the foundational principles there doesn't mean that things don't change. Like, for example, once upon a time, there was no planet Earth, but our best understanding of the model of how planets are formed would hold that the accretion disk from the formation of the sun, eventually things start attracting each other and form planets. Now, at one point, there wasn't a planet, and there was all of these objects which formed together to essentially become a planet. That doesn't continue happening because we've used up that material to make the planet. Similarly, the fact that there's gravity and strong nuclear force and weak nuclear force doesn't mean that the state of affairs, the chemical state of affairs on Earth are always the same. And so whatever it was that caused that is the explanation for the origin of life, the state of the Earth has changed since then. And whatever it was that prompted past evolutionary changes, the state of the Earth has changed since then, but we're still evolving. It's not like evolution stops. This change, I don't exactly represent my parents who don't exactly represent their parents, etc. You can't look at a small chunk of time and reach the conclusion that, well, the forces are all there. Why isn't evolution still going? It is. You could, if you had a time machine, you could go back to the Jurassic era, and even if there was a thinking mind there that could process these sorts of thoughts, they wouldn't be looking around going, well, we all evolved to this, and now we're the pinnacle, and nothing is changing. So we have uniformity as far as we can tell, but that doesn't mean the same things happen over and over again once the system has changed.
Okay, well, here's the point. What I'm trying to get across, and I seem to be getting that indication from you, is that there are forces in effect. Maybe some of the forces are more predominant back then, maybe less now, but the point is nature has forces which work upon the Earth and the substance of the Earth and everything that is here. Correct?
Yes, it's physics and chemistry.
Good. Okay, good. So we got that. What I want to basically do is just put a simple little experiment before you and, basically, test that hypothesis. If you've got the time, it should be pretty quick here. Would you be game for that?
To test what hypothesis?
The natural forces producing the things that are basically surround us here on this Earth.
That physics works? That physics is real?
We observe this.
The natural forces, the natural forces, obviously there was no other force possible. And this was natural forces of the world. These are random forces, basically controlled.
No. You've gone off on a thing where you've said no other forces are possible. I don't know where you're getting that. Then you're saying random forces. Physics isn't random. It's the exact opposite of random. Acceleration,
take a look at
of gravity is directly proportional to mass and inversely proportional to the square of the distance. That's not random. Chemistry,
and I agree with
hydrogen molecules and oxygen molecules combining to make water molecules. That's not random.
I agree.
Okay, so what is the hypothesis you want us to test, and how can we test it in the conversation on the show?
Right. The hypothesis is random chance versus design, intelligent design.
Intelligent design versus random chance, and that's all there can possibly be?
Well, let's put it to the test.
That's not no, it's not something you can put to the test. We need to define things considerably further. And it's not, for example, evolution by means of natural selection is not random. You don't get to say which makes more sense, an intelligently designed system or a random system, if neither of those are demonstrable.
Well, here's the question. If I want to accomplish a certain means, okay?
Yeah.
And the question is, how can I get to that means? Can I demonstrate a method that would be able to deliver that which I...
It doesn't matter.
It
doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is because you would have to demonstrate that this was done with a goal in mind. Evolution doesn't have a goal. The universe doesn't have a goal. We are not the intended outcome. We are what happened.
Mm-hmm. We are consequence.
I want to demonstrate with this particular little scenario or experiment. That's all I want to do. Would you like to?
You want to demonstrate the thing that I just said?
Would that be all right with you?
Why would we need to demonstrate that? This is just by definition and by our understanding. Evolution is an unguided process with no goal. In order for someone to make an argument that there was a goal, they would need to present evidence that there was a goal. So why would we need to spend any time going over something if you're now in agreement with me that there wasn't a goal?
The point is this: there is a goal. Okay, my goal here is to let me finish, please. My goal is to demonstrate the best possible way to get to a desired end. Now, you can say evolution doesn't have an end, but obviously it produced an end.
Stop. I don't care. I will agree with you that an intelligent design is the best way to get to a desired end, because there can't be a desired end without an intelligence to act upon it. None of that is relevant to the universe that we inhabit until you demonstrate that there wasn't, in fact, a goal, and then you can make an argument for why you think you've discovered the source of that goal. But there isn't any identifiable goal. You just believe there is, and that's why you think that, well, intelligent design makes more sense. Yes, it makes more sense if you start by believing there's a goal, but you don't get to start there and be rational.
Well, don't you have to start believing that there's something that can have a goal? Like when you say that this is a desired end, desired by who?
Well, let's say me and you.
Why are you assuming that I'm desiring the world to be like it is today?
No, let me just run the experiment before you, or just this.
Oh, but I just don't understand. You're saying that there's a desired end. Who's desiring the end?
Well, all I want to do is I want to demonstrate a principle here.
I don't know why you don't answer my question.
I don't know why you can't.
Go ahead, ask it again then. Go ahead.
When you say that this is a desired end, who is desiring the end? Who is it? Who is the agent that is doing the desiring?
Well, in this particular experiment, I have a desired end, and I want to demonstrate that.
So you want to demonstrate that this world is what you determined and desired?
No, I'm just saying with regards to this world.
I've already conceded, Alex, that if there is a desired end, then intelligence is likely to be the best path to that desired end. I already conceded it. Why would we need to do an experiment to get to a point that I already conceded?
Well, my question is then, if you have an intelligent design, you have a purpose, you want to get to a particular end, then you take particular action to get to that end. But on the other hand, if you're relying on the natural forces of the world to produce that end for you, the question is, will you be able to get to that desired end?
Well,
first of all,
did we?
You just smuggled in. See, I conceded that if there is a desired goal, that intelligent action towards that goal may well be the most efficient pathway to that goal. I already conceded that. But what you just asked was, is that if there is this desired goal, are you likely to get there if you just rely on randomness? So you won't even, you cannot make an honest comparison between what science actually says. Your dichotomy now is there's an intelligent goal no matter what. And now that there's an intelligent goal, is it better to get there through intelligence or through random processes? And I already conceded that it's probably likely that you will get there through intelligent processes, which doesn't mean that you couldn't get to your goal through random stuff. It doesn't show that doesn't happen, but you haven't done the thing that you have to do at the outset, which is demonstrate a goal. Can you do that?
Okay. Sure. I remember a couple of, I don't know, a year or two ago, whatever the case, you were talking to a fellow, whatever the case, and you could said, it's obvious that intelligent design, you can identify it and look at it, and you can say to yourself, somebody put that together. And you were referring to a bracelet that you had made of chain mail. And you said, it's very obvious you can't, the random forces or the natural forces of this world are going to produce this bracelet. Right? In other words, you were able to look at that, source the material, put it together. You had a purpose in there, and you
are confused.
Hold on. I have a question for you.
Go ahead, Jenna.
Do you think that it is obvious that the Grand Canyon was intelligently designed?
No.
Hello?
No.
So
no?
No.
What makes anything obvious that it's intelligently designed then?
Well, what would make, let's deal
when you
with
say it's obvious.
Matt's statement that his chain mail bracelet was intelligently designed. Answer the question.
Good. I can answer that.
Make that statement?
I can answer that really fucking simply. A, I designed it. I have direct evidence of a design and intention for that bracelet. B, even absent me, we know of countless of these things. And in all of those cases, there is evidence of intentional design and action. And there is no evidence to support the notion that these things occur naturally. That is not the case for suns, planets, and life and evolution. We do have mountains of evidence of these things occurring naturally in accordance with the physical laws of the universe, and zero good evidence that there was a design or a designer. I'm using the bracelet that I made because idiot apologists will say a painting requires a painter. A building requires a building, but you don't recognize design by complexity. Matter of fact, simplicity is a better hallmark of design. You recognize that which is designed by contrasting it with that which occurs naturally. So you have two categories, things that are designed and things that occur naturally. And as far as we can tell, my bracelet fits neatly into the things that are designed because all of the available evidence shows that those things are designed. And a tree shows no evidence of design. It shows all the evidence of occurring naturally. That is the distinction.
Well, here's the question. Could nature produce your bracelet?
I don't know. Is it? I can't demonstrate that it's possible or impossible. When you find a naturally produced bracelet that looks identical to the one that I had, now we can talk. Why are you coming up with hypotheticals that you can't back up?
Well, let's say I've got a box with be able to hold 100 marbles. And so I pull out of this big pail of marbles. I've got 600 marbles, let's say. I pull out 50 green. I put them on the left-hand side. Pull out 50 white, put them on the right-hand side. Me being an agent, I decided that's what I was going to do, and I did it. So on the other hand, I take that box now, and I put a lid on it, and I start to shake it. And as I start to shake it, I look into the box and good heavens, it's starting to get, mixed up. I put the lid back on. I keep on shaking it again. Open the box, they're even more mixed up. And I keep on going. And, let's say after 5 minutes, I'm thinking to myself, okay, can I look in the box? So I look in the box and I find they're just totally mixed.
I'm muting you because I'm completely fucking bored right now. And the fact that you waited 5 minutes when we're talking about things that take billions of years, your impatience and monumental ignorance about all of this is staggering. The thing that you're doing, first of all, even in your example, there's an agent there doing it. If you just set all the marbles in a box and left them alone until there's some other force acting upon them, the laws of physics suggest that nothing about that's going to change until some other force acts upon it. So that would be actually set the box of marbles down, shake it up so that they're mixed up, set them down, and at some point in the next billion or 2 billion years, you come back and you find that they're neatly sorted. Now you might have a case for something that is miraculous or unexplained, and you can't tell whether or not it's natural or not. But until you can demonstrate this or a bracelet that's like this, all you're doing is playing the what if game. You are convinced that there is an intentional design. You are playing the what if there's a design. Could nature do this? Yes, as far as we can tell, nature can and has formed stellar bodies and solar systems and planets and life. And until you can actually demonstrate that there was a plan or is a plan or that there is an intelligent designer in such a way that it is testable and identifiable, all of these musings are just a monumental waste of my time.
Hello?
You're back.
Oh, well, all I'm saying is when we take a look at it, I'm saying that the natural world cannot produce, let's say, your bracelet.
Did you listen to anything he said?
I don't think you did. Prove that the natural world cannot. Prove that. I will give you exactly 1 minute to start proving that the natural world cannot produce that which science holds that the natural world is produced. Go.
Second law of thermodynamics basically says that the world moves from complexity, order to entropy. In other words, randomness, chaos, whatever the case.
No. What kind of system does the second law of thermodynamics apply to?
The elements in this world.
No. What kind of system does the second law of thermodynamics apply to? There's one and only one correct answer. And if you don't get it, then I know you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Physics.
No, a closed system. Go back and read arguments that apologists shouldn't be using and maybe study some thermodynamics, because the second law of thermodynamics applies to a closed system and so therefore is irrelevant to discussions about the evolution of life on Earth. Goodbye, sir. Anywhere else we'd like to go?
I am curious about what Sean has to say.
What Sean has to say.
Line 8.
Is it, the neither or both?
Yeah.
Sean from Minneapolis. You claim you're stuck between two things you can't be stuck between. So maybe there's some confusion we can get through.
I'm curious.
Well, the answer is, okay, are you atheist or theist? And the answer is, I don't know.
Okay, that's fair.
That's a better answer, yeah.
So, okay.
Do you actually actively believe that there is a God?
No. But the things that I can't let go of are numinous things. And Matt, I know you're a musician. At least from watching some of the shows, you've made allusions to the music. And if you've ever performed,
I wouldn't call myself a musician, and neither would most of the people who've seen me play. But thanks.
Well, you've played, so I give you the credit.
Sure.
When you're playing music, there are points in time where you're channeling something that is beyond yourself.
No. That is an assertion that I wholeheartedly reject. How could you possibly reach that conclusion and demonstrate it?
I can't.
Okay, then why would you assert something that you cannot demonstrate at all?
Because it's the numinous is a personal experience, and in the introduction, I waffled between theism and atheism a couple different times in my life, and the thing about atheism I can't come to terms with is the personal experience of something larger than myself, a greater good, something, you're doing something and you're kind of got a mental block, and all of a sudden you just start channeling something. I don't know where this is coming from, but wow, am I having this productively creative moment, and look at this.
Sean, the fact that you want to describe it as channeling something from outside of you doesn't mean that it is. Is there any evidence that it's anything other than your brain?
No.
then why would you believe it's anything other than your brain?
It's hard. It's hard.
No, I did right, because in my brain, I have the emotional state that I have the history and the trauma and all the stuff that is in the past, and then you have these breakthroughs that are, hey, I'm a better person now. I just had this epiphany, and it's just, as an atheist, just reject that stuff happens. I can't.
No, I'm not rejecting that stuff happens. I'm saying you have no way to demonstrate that this epiphany comes from anything other than your brain. Your brain is a thought machine. It is incredibly complex. And the mistake that we make is saying, oh, right now I'm having a mental block. And then a moment later, something happens and you have an epiphany. There's no reason to think that came from outside of you. Your mental block is gone.
Can I tell you something, Sean?
Yeah.
Those feelings of something greater than you can get those feelings after you admit to yourself that you don't believe that there's a God. Because I have had those since deconverting.
Oh, I've deconverted and reconverted and deconverted a couple different times, and this is the last thing that I have that on either side of the fence, they both leave me wanting. And
okay, let me try this. Let me try this, Sean. As soon as I say go, I want you to give me a number between 1 and 1,000. 1, 2, 3, go.
Okay, I got it. 17.
17. Where did that number come from? Did it come from your brain? What did it pop into your brain? Did it feel like something pushed it into your brain? Was it an epiphany? Why 17 and why not 423?
No, I get it, and that's the part about this situation that I failed to describe. That it's not a controllable thing.
Mm-hmm. The thing is, you have to keep asking yourself questions like this. Allow your brain to explore thinking like this, because I learned really quickly, I didn't know how to ask questions. I didn't know how to wonder. I just had these things like, oh, well, that's obviously, something higher power. That's obviously this. That's obviously that. I just had all of these assumptions in my head that I had never chosen to believe. I just assumed so many things. And then once I finally decided to take it apart and say, okay, why do I assume that this is from a greater good rather than just good? And each one of those little things that make you just feel so uncomfortable, break it down as much as you can. Okay, what is it that I think it is? What is it that I think that it's doing, and why? To everything that gives you that uncomfortable feeling. You know what I mean?
There isn't discomfort.
There's no discomfort at all?
No. There's just a gap. There's a gap. And gaps, I like to explore gaps. I'm an engineer, and so for me, I know what I've been told, I know what I've been read, and I can synthesize what I've been told and what I've read. And then there's this third category of things of, wow, these are things that I've experienced that don't always line up with what I've been told and what I've read. And I'm not talking about the alien abduction thing that is, all bizarre and weird. An example is in my job, there are moments where team is presented with a problem and you go, holy cow, how are we going to deal with this problem? I'll go into the office by myself, and you just kind of start working the problem, and you kind of get into this meditative state, and you just start typing, and you're working with the tools, and then it's all done, and you go review it the next day. People say, how did you come up with that? And my answer is, I don't know. Help me understand what I came up with, because it's not a conscious thing that I went through, like a very logical sequence of thinking. It's a creative process, and it just happens.
Yeah, and there's no reason to think that it's coming from outside of you, because we can certainly tap into, we tend to view our brain as if it's, one thing, it's me. But there's memory, there's preferences, there's what's coming in from different receptors at different time. If somebody says, why do you feel hungry? I could say, well, I can get the sensations from my belly, and so that's causing me to feel this. But if somebody's like, why do you like this particular type of music? I don't know. Maybe it's because that played at some point when I was happy. I may not be aware of what the connection is. But how did you write this particular song? Well, I don't know. But I live in a world where I've learned things about writing songs, and I've listened to many songs, and I take bits and pieces of different things and put them together. There's an argument to be made that everything that we ever come up with is derivative, that there's nothing truly original. Like you couldn't even think of anything truly original. It is all a varied product on what we know and understand. The fact that you at any given moment don't have access to why your brain thinks a certain thing, whether it's 17 or 423, is in no way indicative that it's coming from outside of you. That would need to be demonstrated. And all of the evidence points to, there are people who are more creative than others. There are people who are able to come up with things. Maybe your method, some people's method might be, let me meditate and calm my mind to get the distractions out of the way to focus. Somebody else, somebody with ADHD, may be able to focus on a whole bunch of different things at once, and that may be where they are in fact most productive. Other people may be incredibly not productive then. But the fact that you don't know how your brain works completely doesn't in any way indicate that there's something external tinkering with your brain. And how weird would that be if, when you thought of the number 17, or you came up with this particular solution as an engineer, that was some divine entity forcing a thought into your head? I mean, how terrifying and bizarre is that? Because if that being exists, why can't they present the evidence of their existence?
Right. And this thing that I describe, and that when this experience happens, there isn't like an agent or an agency in any of this. It is like a connection to something, and you just kind of, it's kind of interesting. Let's kind of just channel that. And
it's fine to say it's like a connection to something, because now you're in the realm of simile. But it's not justified to say it is a connection to something external.
Right. And the thing that triggers my interest is I can explain this, kind of experience with other people that have similar experience. There's not a lot of people, but creative types tend to have this similar, and they will describe things in a similar way. And I get the alien abduction thing. I'm not going down that path. Because these people, it isn't a priori. They heard this. I'm going to have that experience too. It's more you just kind of get together and say, "How does this work for you?" And they say, "Well, I can't really tell you how it works."
Yeah, I don't know how this gets to being stuck about whether or not there's a God. You either have evidence for a God and a justified reason to believe it, or you believe it without evidence, or you don't believe it.
And I'm in the middle.
There's no middle between I am convinced there's a God and I'm not convinced there's a God. There is no middle.
No, right. Yeah, I get that.
I can understand people vacillating, like, oh, sometimes I'm leaning this way or sometimes I'm leaning that way, because we're not the same all the time. But there's no middle between I am convinced and I'm not convinced. It's a truly binary, direct logical negation. I am convinced, I am not convinced. Those are the only two options.
Right. And
that's true for everything. That's why I didn't say I am convinced there's a God and I'm not convinced. It's true for everything. I am convinced there's a cup of iced tea on the desk next to me. I am not convinced there's a cup of iced tea on the desk next to me. It works for everything. That's the way logic is. If there's a direct logical negation, those are the only two options.
Yes. And as an engineer, when we write software systems, you have, is it true, is it not true, or is it we don't know yet? And we have to code for that a lot. And so I get the logical, the way you break this down in a very logical sense, that you have the excluded middle, you can't have that. But in my engineering education, we actually have to deal with the excluded middle sometimes. So I
Is I just toggled a bit. Is it a 1?
no, I get that. I don't know. But I'd have to
I
test.
don't either. I don't either. But we know that it's a 1 or a 0. But what we believe about it is also binary. Do you believe it's a 1? You either believe it's a 1 or you don't believe it's a 1. And that also applies with
Right.
you either believe it's a 0 or you don't believe it's 0. But there's no middle ground. You are either convinced of one of those propositions or you are not convinced.
Well, there's the case where you don't know yet, and you have to test to see.
Okay. Whether or not you know is not relevant. There's still only 2 positions. You either believe it is A or not A, or you do not believe it's A.
What is that position called when you're in the middle of a guess? Like when you say, for example, guess a number between 1 and 100, and I say, 7, and I'm waiting for you to confirm, oh, is that a 7 or not? And so I'm saying, I don't know yet, but maybe it's a 7. So is that what you're referring to, Sean? Some kind of like middle ground?
There's a point in time when the answer is out there, and you don't know what it is until you ask the question. And once you ask the question, you get the data back that can tell you. And some of the things that are out there,
But there's
I don't know if I'd asked all the questions yet.
so
Right.
we're not talking about the same thing. If the answer is out there and you don't know it, or you're not aware of it, then you either have a justified belief of what the answer is, or you don't. Those are still the only options.
Right. I agree with you.
Okay. Because there's what the answer is, what you believe about the answer. Those are separate things. And
Right.
so
The answer is
if you know, for example, like if I flip a coin, you know that I've flipped a coin. You can observe me doing it, but you don't know whether the coin has landed heads up or tails up. But we do know, unless I'm cheating, that it has either landed heads up or tails up. And so if somebody says it's heads, they could possibly have a justified reason for believing that it has landed head side up. For example, they might have handed me a coin that has heads on both sides, or they might have seen it just as it landed, or whatever else. But if genuinely we don't know, then you still, I'm not saying you either believe it's heads or tails. I'm saying you either believe it's heads or you don't believe it's heads, or you believe it's tails or you don't believe it's tails. Within logic, we assess propositions independently, not two propositions. It's not proposition A is it landed head side up, proposition B is it landed tail side up, and you have to pick one of those. That's not it. It's a single proposition that we're evaluating.
no, I understand that.
Okay.
So do you
and
believe that there's a
when-
God?
Say that again, Jenna.
I'm sorry. I was just wondering, do you believe that there is a God?
No.
Okay. Cool.
And
That's fair.
yeah, and if that changes, then it changes.
Right. It doesn't mean that has to be, the answer has to be no.
I'd spend some time.
And
I'd spend some time looking into the neuroscience related to creativity and stuff. But basically, as far as I know, as far as I'm aware, there isn't an answer. But there also, to the like, why did I think of this instead of this? And it may be that it's all deterministic, and you could not have possibly thought of any number other than 17, given everything that's happened in the universe leading up to that moment when I said go. And we can't test that because we don't have a time machine. We can't rewind. And if we could, we would already be changing the circumstances.
We don't have a second model to compare it to.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to try to get to another call before we're done. But I appreciate it. And don't beat up on yourself so much. Yep, you have experiences that feel like you're channeling something else outside of you. Okay, cool. It's I don't find anything to be worried about. I remember, like, we have illusions of, like, if you cross your fingers and put a pencil between your fingers, you can get a particular sensory illusion about what's happening there. And if you did it with your eyes closed, There's plenty of, there's actually an entire magic trick that I've done in the past where the person on stage is having a completely different experience from everybody else because they are keeping their eyes closed and witnessing miracles while the audience actually sees what's going on. But from their perspective, it's miracles. That feeling of awe, or I don't know why my brain came up with this, or is the universe entirely deterministic? Those are all unknowns. It's not until we know that we would then be justified saying, yep, I'm channeling a god, or I'm channeling a muse, or whatever.
Okay. Well, thank you, Matt and Jenna. I appreciate you taking my call.
Yep.
Thanks for calling, Sean.
All right. We've got Omar in Orange County who says that my standards are very different for things that I believe versus things that my opponent believes. So, hi, Omar. We are close to about out of time, but I wanted to make sure.
Yep. I really appreciate you taking my and happy Sunday to you both. I hope you're staying 6 feet away from each other in this coronavirus.
We're in different houses.
Okay. Yeah, good move. It's crazy times, and I wish you both safety. But anyway, let me just get right into it. I've been listening to a few of your past callers, and I've seen a few of your discussions and debates with various folks. And I found it interesting because I try and be a critical thinker myself and look at every argument and a person's reasoning with a critical eye. And what I found, my observation in some of your discussions, even with some of the callers just before me, and in your discussions with David Wood on secular humanism, and in your discussions even with a fellow atheist, Cosmic, on whether eating meat is morally wrong, what I have observed is that your standards tend to change and your skepticism is super, super high on an opposing view, and your skepticism tends to go a bit lower when it's a view that you're aligned with. So those have been my observations on various discussions that
Bring it on. Give me one example so that we can sew this up, because my position is that I proportion my confidence to the available evidence.
Sure.
And that can change.
So let's just, I'm sorry, say that again?
The available evidence can change.
The available evidence can change, but there's a lot to unpack here with this particular issue, right? What I'm saying here is you have a moving the goalposts fallacy issue, Matt.
Instead of just continuing to assert that, make the case. We are already past the end of the show, but I'm going to keep going. So show me where I'm using standards that are not compatible with the claim, because not all claims are equal.
Okay, so you do this in a variety of ways. So with Cosmic, when it came to the morality of eating meat, he got you to acknowledge that most of the meat that we get on our plates is from farms, from slaughterhouses, and animals suffer intensely under those conditions. And he got you to acknowledge that, and he had gotten you to acknowledge before that that would be morally wrong, so you wouldn't do it. Then he asked you, why do you continue to do it? And you just completely dodged him. You went in different directions, talking about how you're a liberal Democrat, and you basically completely dodged the question. Now, that's not changing the goalposts, but that's just...
Okay, so you want to call in and accuse me of changing the goalpost, and then you want to give some example that is not me moving the goalpost.
Hear me out, Matt. I'll give you
No. I heard you out.
You asked for it.
We are past the end of the show. You've accused me of moving the goalpost.
Okay, let's give you an example of you
Shut
changing
up
the
and let me finish talking, or you're not going to get to speak again. I promise you. You accused me of moving the goalposts. I asked for an example of that. You then go to talk about a conversation I've had, which was an impromptu conversation, which I'm not holding up as anything other than a demonstration at the time of what my opinion and position is on something. Then when you get through the whole story, you say, now that's not an example of you moving the goalposts. So why don't you come up with an example that supports what your accusation is so that I can address it?
Okay, got it. I'll just give you a quick example. I've heard you discuss with many people on we need verifiable evidence that supernatural things that can occur from a God actually occur. And many people have presented historical evidence, biblical evidence. So the goalposts will change. The goalposts will change with historical biblical evidence. Well, we don't know who wrote these gospels. How can we know who
That's
wrote
not a moving of the goalpost. To point out that there's a problem with the evidence is not moving the goalposts. How would you demonstrate?
No.
Let's imagine right now, because I've dealt with this over and over again, that somebody were to walk in and cut my head off, and doctors verified that I was decapitated and dead, and then at a later time, my head is back on, and I'm walking and talking. We would all agree that at one point I was dead and now I'm not. How would you ever demonstrate what the best explanation for that is?
For that specific example, you couldn't demonstrate what the best explanation is.
Then how could you possibly cite anonymous, unverified, uninvestigatable historical sources and suggest that we could do that?
That's where you change the goalposts. Because
No, there's no goalpost change. You're describing, no, I'm not holding on. I will mute you if I have to. I described a scenario that is the best possible circumstance for testing, where doctors are involved, where it happens now in the modern era, where we can investigate thoroughly, and you acknowledge that you wouldn't be able to demonstrate supernatural causation or any causation. And yet when I point out that the case that theists with regard to Jesus are describing is demonstrably worse, it is less prone to investigation, it is less reliably sourced, it does not have the advantage of modern. I'm not moving the goalposts. I'm pointing out that the claim itself. What'd you say?
Okay.
What did you say?
Said you are in all respects. Once you're done.
Go fuck yourself.
Nope,
you're done. I'm not moving the goalposts. See, the thing here is that different claims require different evidence to substantiate belief. And so if I say I have a pet dog, well, that's a rather mundane claim because of all the available evidence that we already have. If nobody had ever heard of a dog or seen a dog, me saying that would make it extraordinary, in the same way of saying I've got a pet unicorn. If I come up with a scenario wherein we have something that many people would consider miraculous, and we don't know what the explanation is under the best circumstances, pointing out that the scenario offered by theists for Jesus's resurrection is demonstrably weaker circumstances than the one I've described. That's not me moving the goalposts. That's me pointing out that you can't reach the goalpost because you're kicking from further the fuck away. That's the thing. I have moved my scenario up as close to the goalpost as I can, and you acknowledge that we can't get there. And then you want to go to another scenario where you are standing further away from the goalposts in time, in technology, in the availability to investigate the claim and everything about it, and suggesting I'm moving the goalposts. I'm not moving the goalposts. You're trying to claim that your kicker from the first century is good or better than the scenario I described. That's not me moving any fucking goalpost at all. That's me saying, in order for a claim to be believable, in order for you to demonstrate that, you would need to make a showing. Because even if I believed that the Bible accurately describes the resurrection of Jesus, that it actually occurred, I'm still in a position where I have no explanation for it. I cannot say it must have been an act of God, or it was even likely to be an act of God, or that it was supernatural. All I can get to is, I'm convinced this happened. I'm not, by the way. I'm convinced this happened, but I don't know why. It's not the fault of science and reliable standards of evidence that claims rooted in the supernatural fail to reach the goalposts. It is in the very nature of what they're claiming that it is untestable, unfalsifiable. It's not me moving the goalposts. And when it comes to the meat issue, which I will repeat here for the umpteenth time, I have repeatedly acknowledged that while it may be morally superior, and likely is morally superior, to not eat meat, that does not mean that it is necessarily immoral to eat meat. And even Vegan Gains and Alex and the others will agree with that because of the roadkill example. It's not immoral for me to eat that roadkill, apart from whatever diseases I might be communicating. I am, by the way, mostly vegan at this point, not for any moral reasons. That's just the way it works out.
Good
However,
for you.
while I hold that something can be morally superior, it's like in the same way that donating 90% of your wealth towards fighting a disease is morally superior to donating $1 of your wealth. And neither of those is immoral.
Mm-hmm.
And not donating anything isn't necessarily moral. This is about moral virtue and responsibility. And those are two different categories. This is what I tried to explain in that discussion. I'm not going to pretend that I did it particularly well. It's funny that you went to the Alex O'Connor thing and then wanted to go or deal with the supernatural, but it's not me moving the goalposts. I don't know. I think, are we going to take this last call real quick?
I'm okay with it if you are.
Yeah. So I've got Aaron in Phoenix, Arizona, who asks, why do I not believe in Jesus? What would I accept as evidence of the resurrection? I kind of touched on this. Are you there, Aaron?
I'm here.
I kind of touched on that a minute ago. That's kind of why I went to the resurrection. I don't know what would count as good evidence for a resurrection. I would think that if we're speaking resurrection, I would need good evidence that the person was dead, verifiable, testable evidence the person was dead, and then verifiable, testable evidence that they were alive after that point at which they were dead, with some significant time gap, because we can resuscitate people in the short term and in specific circumstances. It's not that I'm opposed to thinking that somebody came back from the dead. It is the specifics of the story aren't supported by available evidence. It was evidently a single instance occurrence. And even if I were to believe that it happened, I still wouldn't have any way to know how or why it happened. How do you rule out other unknowns?
Okay. So, of course, we can't bring back that event, and not knowing or not observing that situation. There's no way to test that to see if it was true.
Well, not
I
only
agree
that,
with that.
but the only evidence for the resurrection of Jesus are in the Gospels.
Yeah. What? So there's no evidence that you would accept to.
I'm willing to accept
that was true.
I'm willing to accept that the gospel authors are accurately writing what they heard or believed to be true. In the same way that if my mom comes and tells me that she was abducted by aliens, I don't think my mom is lying to me. I'm willing to accept that she had an experience that she is trying to describe in that fashion, but that doesn't tell me what actually happened. And so when we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are anonymous gospels, not written by those names, ages ago when we can't investigate, and you have an oral tradition that is ultimately written down where the facts and the details don't line up, what can we say from those books happened at all if we don't have independent confirmation of this thing?
Okay, let's go back real quick to the resurrection. Okay, so is there a possibility that it could have happened?
I don't know. I have no reason to think it's possible. How could you demonstrate that it's possible?
Yeah, because we both can't go back in time and observe that situation. So there's a possibility.
No, there's not a possibility until a possibility is demonstrated.
Why not?
The fact that you can't show it's impossible does not mean it's possible. Just like the fact that you can't show that it's possible doesn't mean it's impossible. Both possibility and impossibility would need to be demonstrated.
That makes no sense. But you can't say that it's impossible.
Right.
You can't prove that it happened or didn't happen.
How can you say something is
It actually
possible? How can you say something is possible just because nobody's been able to show it's impossible?
And how could he say that it's impossible? Nobody showed that it was possible.
Exactly. And if you were listening to me, I literally said just that. Both possibility and impossibility would need to be demonstrated. So you don't get to claim it's possible, and I don't get to claim it's impossible. What I said when you asked what I said when you asked me if it was possible was I have no reason to believe that it's possible. There's been no demonstration of that.
Exactly.
He's not saying that he is convinced that it is impossible. Those are two different things. Do you understand that?
I'm saying that.
Do you understand that, Aaron? Before we move on.
Exactly. Yes.
Do you understand that not being convinced that it is possible is different from being impossible?
She can't hear you because of the delay, Aaron. You have to be a little more patient with these calls because we're not on our regular call service. So I cannot claim that a resurrection is possible, and I can't claim that it's impossible. What I can say is there is no good evidence that this has in fact ever occurred, which, given the way we normally view things are not demonstrated to be, or not considered true until they're demonstrated to be true.
Yeah, with that information that you just stated, there's no possible evidence that we can bring back up. We cannot recreate that event because that event requires God raising Jesus Christ from the dead.
Yeah.
So why do you believe that it happened?
Whose fault is it that we don't have good evidence? Let's assume for a second that there is a God who came down and took human form and sacrificed himself to serve as a loophole for rules that he's in charge in, resurrected, and now 2,000 years later, we do not have good evidence, do not have access to evidence that would warrant believing that. Whose fault is that?
It depends what you accept as evidence.
No. I said, let's imagine the scenario where a God does all this and we get to today and we don't have sufficient evidence to warrant belief. Whose fault is that?
Once again, it depends on the evidence that you accept. For example, one second. For example,
no, we're not 1 second.
Do you want me to explain?
No, I don't.
Or not?
No, I don't. Because
why are you asking me questions?
Well, I asked you a question, but you're answering a different question.
And I'm explaining.
No, you're not. I asked you, whose fault is it? And you said it depends on what evidence you accept. But in my scenario, we have already acknowledged.
Explain fully.
I'm gonna hang up on you in about 3 seconds if you don't let me finish talking. In my example, we had already gotten to the point where we cannot test because we don't have a time machine. And you had acknowledged this was a single instance occurrence that we cannot investigate. And I asked, whose fault is that? And it has nothing to do with what standard of evidence. We already acknowledged that the standard that we are unable to achieve is that we cannot properly investigate this. Whose fault is that?
Okay, that would be the atheist's fault. I want to explain why.
No, it's God's fault. And
wait, I want to hear why.
Oh my God. Okay. No, it's fine. Jen wants to hear why. Please explain why it's the atheist's fault that the creator of the universe created a scenario where we both agree we have no ability to test a scenario.
All right, thank you. So if you let me explain, I'll explain. So you mentioned right now about testing the scenario. So the evidence that you are looking for is to test something. You cannot test a past event. That's the first thing. Number one.
Whose fault is that?
Wait.
You can't.
Whose fault is that? Why can't we test? Did God create everything? Did God create a universe in which we can't test past events?
Are you going to let me finish my?
I want you to answer that question rather than dodging. In your view?
What about your first question?
In your view, did God create a universe in which we do not have the ability to test past events like this?
Okay, of course we cannot test past events.
That's not what I fucking asked. In your view, did God create the universe in which we cannot test past events like this? Yes or no?
We cannot test past events.
I asked you.
I'll answer your first question.
Shut the fuck up.
He's going to pick which question he's going to answer.
I asked you a yes or no question. In your view, did God create a universe in which we are prohibited from testing instances like this in the past? Yes or no?
Okay, let me explain.
No,
Just
I
calm
asked
down
you
for
a
a
yes or
second.
no question.
I'm going to answer. I'm going to
You don't need to tell me, let me explain, and you don't need to say I'm going to answer. I asked a yes or no fucking question. Yes or no better be the next word out of your mouth, or I will hang up.
I'm going to answer.
Goodbye.
I don't know.
In your so here's the thing. Here's why his brain would not let him answer that simple yes or no question, because it gets to the point that I was making. The first question is, in your view, did God create a universe where we are prohibited from exploring, testing properly events in the past like this? That's an obvious, easy yes that any honest person could answer if they believe that there's a God who created anything. He didn't want the follow-up question. The follow-up question is, could God have created a universe in such a way that we could reasonably test and investigate events like this in the past? Because that question gets to the heart of it. If God could have created it differently, then it's on God. It's God's fault.
I don't know that he necessarily believes that you have to be able to test it to believe it.
Well, I know that he does not believe that.
Right.
That's why he wants to keep going to it's the atheist fault, because you just have different standards of what's test.
Right.
I don't care about that. He agreed that we can't test that event in the past. And so here's the thing. Either God could have created a universe in which we could test the past, which I don't know what his answer to that is, because he wouldn't answer the first one. But in either scenario, we are at a point where we cannot reliably test those past instances.
Mm-hmm.
And if you believe them, that they're true, in the absence of reliable testing, then you aren't being skeptical. You have to apply that same sort of claim universally, which means when voodoo priests claim to raise people from the dead, you need to accept that. When somebody in some other religion claims to live off of prana and not actually eat food, they get all of their energy from the sun and they never eat, you have to accept that, even though those claims are more testable in the sense that we can go out and investigate them. Evidently, chat says that Alice doesn't exist, which is funny, because evidently Alice is in chat, and I don't know. It was a distraction, and my apologies, because we've run about 22 minutes over, but I wanted to make sure that we got in all the calls that we got in this kind of extended live long show. It's frustrating because you work to figure out what is the best question I could ask,
right,
that gets them to a state of understanding the difference in this.
Mm-hmm.
If he wants to just say, I'm justified in believing it without evidence, well, that's what Dinesh D'Souza did when we were on stage. Tried to claim that he wasn't on weaker epistemological grounds. And I'll be doing a video tomorrow to kind of point out why that's an incredibly difficult problem.
Cool.
Oh, I'm being told to keep going because we have a technical issue.
Well, we can talk to Laura or Lana.
There we go. Let's so that's the call screeners aren't working. So we're on auto screen. Lana was raised in a very strict Baptist home, gave up religion as a teenager. Your daughter is transfer and
Russia.
Anyway, Lana, Laura, welcome to the show. You're on with Jenna and Matt.
Hi, this is so exciting. Can I tell you how to say my name properly? It's
yes,
Laura.
It's what?
Hana Laura, a bit like Honolulu. Hana Laura.
Hana Laura. Okay.
Hana Laura. Oh, cool.
Thanks.
Hey, I've been listening to your show. I found a lot of, I guess, peace. I was raised in a really strict Baptist home. In fact, my parents were missionaries before I was born in Germany. My grandpa started a camp in northern Iowa for the particular type of Baptist that my family is. And so it's just, been a really strong thing. I gave it up when I was a teenager, about 18 maybe, and have lived my life as one of the only people in my big family that's also really close, as someone who doesn't believe in God and don't care about church or anything like that. And I raised my daughter that way as well. She came out as transgender last year.
Mhm.
And
Good for her.
you know, she's wonderful and beautiful. She's doing really well. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit nervous.
It's okay.
So our extended family has a reunion at this camp that my grandpa started, I don't know, 80, 60 years ago, something. And the whole extended family gets together. And I got thinking about this happening every 5 years. And I got onto the Facebook page where everybody in the family is and said, my daughter's trans. Will she be safe and welcome? And this happened in the fall, and there's members of my immediate family that I am not speaking to because of the blowout of me asking that question, where basically several members of my family have been really accepting and wonderful. And then some of them, including my parents, who, despite them being really strict religious and me not being, we've been really close, while I've been raising my kids. And, they think that they can disagree or disapprove or whatever based on their, crazy beliefs of the Bible. But they think that it's okay, since it's their space, to not allow her to use the women's restroom, which she's been transitioning for almost a year. And, she's clearly a young lady. And it just so disturbed me that my family could have this conversation where they're debating if my daughter's allowed. And I even called up the camp director and he made it very clear and tried to give me, the bullshit line about, as Christian love. And I said, no, don't talk to me about love when you're denying my daughter just like a basic human right. It's really disturbing, and I'm not sure how to proceed with a relationship with people that have been great support to me and my daughter.
How
have
is
these
she handling
disgusting beliefs. My daughter she doesn't care. Or she says she doesn't care. She says that she knew that would be the reaction. Even her own biological father, who is also very Christian, said, okay, well, I accept you. I'll use, the bare minimum. I'll use female pronouns and use your preferred name, but you can't ever come visit because I'm not going to explain you to my, my real kids. So she lost her father. She lost
real kids.
he's kind of been what? I'm sorry.
Did he actually say
yeah.
with real kids?
I'm sorry. What about real kids?
Did he actually say that?
Oh, no. It's just that through the 17 years that we were never really together, but
I see.
It just has always been really apparent that his mistake kid is not. He treats the kids that he had, when he got married and had a family and stuff.
Do you live in a big town?
It's just say again?
Do you live in a big town or like a little town or a big city?
Well, I don't live anywhere near my family. I live in a small town.
Okay.
Shoot.
The reason that I ask is just because the only people in my life that I know of that still deny that transgendered people exist simply have not been exposed to transgendered people. They don't understand. They don't believe it because they don't see it. I'm not. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there was actually, before anybody knew in my family, just, me and my husband, about my daughter, my mom said, well, this woman in our church decided that she, is a different gender, so of course she has to leave the church. And she's saying all this stuff, and I just said, Mom, could you love a transgendered grandchild? And this was the first time we'd ever talked about it about a year ago before my daughter was out. And she said, well, it's not going to solve everything, and just kind of ran away. And it's just so confusing to me that, I mean, a lot of my family members are, they're not like the homeschool Christian conservative type. They have regular jobs, and my oldest brother, who I haven't spoken to since this whole thing, lives in Chicago. It's I don't think it's a matter of exposure for them, and I do feel for a lot of people that it might be, and I have been willing to educate people little by little. Like, I have music students, and if the parents are like, it requires some sort of explanation, and so there's been a little bit of that where and I'm okay with that. But when it comes to my family, and it just really blindsided me that it made me think that I had at some point accepted that they are wonderful, loving family members, but they have these sort of gross beliefs that they think, and it's most of my family. And I think that I had just gotten comfortable with that all this time, sort of since, we made amends in my early 20s. And I was like, you're not allowed to preach to me, and I can hang out with you. You're not allowed to ever ask me to go to church with you or try to convert me, and we can still have a relationship. Nothing had ever like bumped up against their, those weird Christian beliefs until now. And I just couldn't believe, with how much my family has loved my kid growing up, that some of them would react in this way. And I have no idea how to move forward with, I didn't talk to I'm really close to my parents. I didn't talk to them for several months. I started to talk to them a little bit again. And at first it was surface. And then there's this part of me that's like, I can't ever have that relationship with them again, knowing that they think that my daughter is screwed up in the head, and that she's not like legitimate in what's going on, and they don't even believe. My mom said, well, you don't go like into a mosque and tell them how to treat people. It was just, how can you compare, denying, and plus the fact that, all these people in my family were on Facebook talking about my teenage daughter's bathroom habits. It's a different pain than I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that you're going through this, and I'm so sorry that there are so many people that are resisting the idea that people are different from them.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I can't offer you any advice that is sound. I would just stress that people can change.
I hope so.
And if not, as much as it sucks, there are people who are no longer a part of my life,
right?
Because they're essentially a toxic influence on my life or on the people who I'm around.
Right.
And if I have like, if I'm streaming on Twitch, if I'm game streaming, I have zero tolerance for any trans bigotry or anything that's even in the ballpark of that. Just, you can fuck right on off. I don't need you here. I don't care that you donated $5 to, watch me play games. You're not getting a refund. You don't deserve a refund, whatever.
Right.
But it's the same thing as, it's finding a community that is welcoming. And one of the things, Jen, people came up with this years ago, that you're family if you act like family. And I completely agree with that. I don't care if we are blood related. You are a family if you act like family. And there, I'd rather have the family I chose than the family that I was born to, if the family I was born to is awful. Now, my brother is awesome, and my parents and I still get along despite issues. But there are people who are closer to me than that for very good reasons. And part of it is, tied to Atheist Community of Austin. And I get it. There's going to be arguments and disagreements and stuff like that. But my feeling is to go to point out the bad arguments. Like, what do you mean you wouldn't walk into a mosque and say this? Did I walk into your church and say this? I'm saying this to you. I would say this to a Muslim. I would say this to any person, irrespective of their religious belief. But it's pointing out the bad arguments isn't what you need, because you can already spot that. What you need is to surround yourself with people who are going to be supportive of you and your daughter as this goes forward, and to make sure that the people who are not going to be supportive don't represent a toxic influence on her life or your life. Because the only thing that matters is that you guys take care of your life in a way where you are not mired in depression and anxiety and strife and frustration with other people in your family. And there's a ton of resources out there, Trevor Project and other things, but there's also, the Recovering from Religion and the Secular Therapist Project. If things go down the road, sounds like, I don't want to just say that like your daughter's putting a good face on it. It sounds like she has at least in some way made her peace with this, that this is going to be difficult. I genuinely hope that she can work together in communities with other people so that it is nowhere near as difficult as she thinks it might be. Because nobody should just have to live their life going, well, this is going to suck, so let me just prepare for all the suckage. We should work towards a way where it doesn't suck as much, and eventually where it doesn't suck at all.
Exactly. On what I said about people can change, that I want to add that, again, what Matt said, that doesn't mean that people will change. And so if you have people that are showing some violent tendencies, maybe stay away from those people. But I want to just add, though, that I have some mental health issues that are not necessarily recognized by everyone in my family. And so I'm not transgender. I can't relate in that way, but I can relate in the way that I'm not necessarily accepted completely. And just, again, kind of along with lines of what Matt said, I stay away from those people to protect my own health. Just take care of yourselves. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think I know a lot of what you said, but I need to hear it and know that my struggle to find that right balance of, if I'm going to be able to, have any kind of relationship with my parents, or, I know there's no choice, if I pick my daughter. But
it's her choice who she wants to associate with.
Just keep loving and supporting your daughter, and stay focused on making things better. And don't feel like this is any way, you are not the shoulders that need to bear up the world.
Right.
You just need to be there for you first and your daughter, and anybody that's getting in the way of that, sorry, I don't have time for you, as sad as it is. Also, in addition to the other resources, you can call 1-844-I-DOUBT-IT to get to Recovering from Religion. But the ACA has a Discord, which I'm sure will be posted up at the bottom of the screen. And there's plenty of people in there you can talk with about all kinds of stuff. It's tiny.cc/ACA Discord. That's available all the time. We're going to go ahead and let you go because we're way, 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 way over time. But we appreciate it.
Thanks for getting me in.
Yeah, we want the best for you and your daughter. So you take care of each other and practice, your social distancing.
Thanks.
On that note, we're going to wrap this up, and I want to make sure that people know that because we're doing this remotely, this is the way shows are going to continue for the foreseeable future. The mayor of Austin has a stay-at-home order, and until that's lifted, we will continue to do shows like this. A huge thank you, especially to Vern and Mark and all the people on the crew. There's the empty crew can. You can see the lights are even off at the building. There's nobody there. Everybody is VPN'd and remote and spread all around the country. And we genuinely appreciate all of you who tuned in, who participated in the chat, who called into the show, even the people who were incredibly frustrating. And we will see you again next week. And I know on the schedule, it says Alfred Mims. We're not necessarily sticking to that schedule. We will try to, and we will speak with him to make sure that he can remote in fine. I'm anticipating that it'll all be resolved and work out. But thanks to all of you. Thanks, Jenna. Thanks to everybody who watched. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?
No, you're done.